Burgess Shale deep in the Canadian Rockies, which actually helped to establish the origins of human life, pinning it back onto this tiny little creature called the Pichea gracilens. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the Burgess Shale is this, some of you will, I'm sure, already know this, but it's a place in the Canadian Rockies where essentially half of a mountain fell away. So you get a side view, a cross-section of a mountain looked at from the side. Very useful because you see all these stems and branches of life and the fossil record. You're not drilling down for it, you're surveying it like that. Scientists go there in a big way. It's the best example we have. And what's very striking about it is how many of the branches and sprigs go nowhere. They just taper off. Gould, in fact, says it's silly to think of evolution as a tree. It's much more useful to think of it as a big bush. It goes in all directions. A tree seems to have a sense of upward phototropic movement. This is more like a bush that's growing sideways and so on. So the question is, suppose you could scan all this picture onto a tape, mixing the metaphor slightly, rewind that tape back to the beginning, play it again. There's absolutely no guarantee that it would come out the same way. In fact, the likelihood that it would come out the same way is almost nothing. Very sobering thought. And in the succession of evolutions that led to ourselves, there's one moment where there's a tiny creature called the Pichea gracilens, gracilens simply meaning graceful, meaning bendy, which has the beginnings of a vertebrae system, of a spinal column. And that's the creature from which we got the idea of having a spine, and built upon it. If it had been left out of the mix, there's no Homo sapiens either, and it's sort of that big. And if the tape was replayed, it might not show up in the right time and place.
From which you conclude randomness and no plan.
Well, certainly, I would certainly say no plan. Or, because I can't quite say that, because no one can be that certain, no plan that isn't fantastically wasteful, capricious, arbitrary, and run by a designer who half the time doesn't know what he's doing, a mad scientist, in other words, and possibly a very nasty one. I mean, in other words, certainly you can't say it's a benign plan, no. No, you could not say this was a Heavenly Father plan. The implications of there being a planner of that plan are much more frightening than the implications of it being random.
We're running towards the end, but I want to quickly go to Stephen Jay Gould's own philosophy, because you mentioned it earlier. He was not an atheist, in spite of understanding this. He was an agnostic who took the view that science and religion ask different questions about life. And he reached this conclusion: if we keep science and religion apart, neither one can oppress the other. But in fact, he wanted to, and he said this: I believe with all my heart in a respectful, even loving concordat between science and religion. Now, you admire him a lot.
Yeah, I do. I think he was one of the great educators of all time, and that's why it cost me a lot of pain to say why I disagree with him, and at such length. When he was a boy, he was a Marxist, and I think he overcompensated for not being one by trying to be more friendly towards religion than it deserves. And